Thank you, Charlotte. Again, welcome everyone and Happy New Year. I hope everyone got at least one night of 8 hours sleep over the break. I don't know, hoping you did. Anyway, welcome. Thank you guys for making it. I know we have a lot of folks on today, so I will ask you to be generous in using the chat box for questions. And Karen, you and I will periodically maybe switch off in terms of just calling out the questions to make sure we don't miss them. And Charlotte, I might ask you to just point anything out that we might miss over the course of the conversation today. We are going to have set times for question and answer, but again, please don't hesitate. If we're on a slide and you have a question, throw it right in and we will get to it. So, lots of new things happening, starting with just, the expected activity of reporting requirements. But we also have a lot of important information, updates and changes and good things and corrections. So I want to make sure that everybody gets the right information, and just know if you happen to have any colleagues who could not make it today or ask about it, as always, this is placed in our technical assistance page. It is recorded and shared, but a lot of times it's good to hear it sort of just in time and be able to pose your questions as needed. So Charlotte, I'm going to ask you to take us to the next slide. Here's our disclaimer. I'm going to jump right through that, Charlotte, and move us on to the next slide. So what are we talking about today? I want to give you due dates for performance reporting. And just as important, I want to give you a number of dates for upcoming talking circles, upcoming opportunities as a group, small or large, to be able to ask your questions, training opportunities. We're going to talk about the data quality and some data quality issues that have come up in the data collection system. And this is really on the cusp, especially just a note to our FY21 grantees who may be new or who haven't been with the program for a while. We have annual required reporting in the data collection system that happens at the same time as those traditional annual performance reports that you complete through G5. So there's some simultaneous things, there's some parallel and duplicative information, but we'll talk about that over the next couple of months. You're going to have a lot of opportunities to learn what and why, and just as importantly, the mechanics of getting all the data in. So we just want to make sure we're giving you every opportunity to ask your questions and get the right answers. And of course, when I don't have the answers, we'll get them to you. The other really big thing, and I know many of you know this who are 18 grantees or earlier, we've been working over the last many months on really trying to clean up the debt referral situation. And by that, I mean individuals who've already exited the program and for whatever reason don't have an accurate status as far as completion, as far as fulfilling their service payback obligation, or in kind of this limbo. So we have some updates about where we're headed with that. And I want to make sure you guys, again, are on the same page as us. And then finally, we'll just share out on some upcoming events. But again, we will stop periodically for questions as we go through. And Doug is answering. If you've looked at that chat box, you were answering my question about, did you get 8 hours of sleep at some point over the break? I hope you did, Doug. I'll even go for 7. Let's get to the next slide. That's me, Angela Hernandez, and I'm your program officer. Next slide. And I'm joined today by our colleague, Karen Schroll, who, as you guys know, works with ANLAR Westat and offers us a lot of support on the data collections system side, specifically with the help desk, and a lot of reporting that she shares out with us. for congressional reporting purposes. So thank you, Karen, again for joining us today. And she's going to be walking through some of the data pieces as we get later into the presentation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start us off by talking a little bit about just some basic data. You don't need to scribble this down. I'm going to ask you to kind of listen and get a sense and pay attention for a couple of reasons. One is because I asked, it was a small group that I had together in November for the talking circle, but I did poll that group and I asked them because many of you have multiple grants across multiple cohorts. And we queried to see, do you guys want all these APRs due at the same time or do you want them staggered? And by and large, our respondents said, please stagger them, don't kill us. And so I thought that made sense, but I wanted to hear it directly from you all. So our attendees said that and we listened. And so I'm going to talk about that today. So there'll be different dates. So, you know, the good news, it's not all due at the same time. And sometimes the bad news is it's not all due at the same time. So it's remembering more dates, right? So, you know, the good with the bad, and I'll just ask you to kind of follow along. And if and when you have questions, and Karen, please feel free to unmute and stop me if you see something I should be answering in that chat box that I'm not looking at as I'm speaking. So let's go to the next slide. So what I did was what I like to do, which are make handy dandy charts. And I'm going to start by cohorts. And I went ahead and put some of the information for some of our much older cohorts because many of you also have 2016 grants or 2017 grants, and just small reminders about when those final performance reports are due. So for FY16 grants, we had a handful that requested a second no cost extension period, and they were granted that. And so that final performance report for those few FY16 grantees is due toward the end of this month on Friday, the 28th. And that's, again, for those that had the additional period. For FY17 NCEs, you see no cost extension because you requested 5 years, right? And so that's going to be due at the end of the year of December 30, 2022. So again, 120 days after the end of the project period. And it's more just a heads up that that's coming, and certainly in advance of that FPR coming due. When the grant ends, like always, we send a notification that an FPR will be due. We'll provide some training or guidance. And what I will ask of the 2016 that are ending this year, if there's more information that you need or want for the FPR, feel free to reach out to me. Again, if that's due at the end of the month and you have any sort of lingering questions. Because we had asked you to rely on an FPR training that we had given when your cohort originally ended. It was recorded, but that's pretty much all the guidance you got. Moving to the FY 2018 cohort, you see that your APR for this year, meaning covering the first half of year 4, is going to be due at the end of March. So March 31st of this year. For our new grantees, our year 1 FY21 cohort, those that were just awarded this past August, your APR for this year, so it's a narrative that we would expect is covering through the end of March, would be due Friday, April 29 of this year. So I'll talk a little bit about notifications and stuff, but I'm going to move us to the next slide. So some basics, but for our newer grantees, important notes. The annual performance reports must be accessed by the project director on record in G5. So if anybody else, a coordinator, an assistant, whoever is trying to access it, they're not going to be able to. It has to be the project director on record who is accessing the report. They are completed, you can download, and they are submitted via G5. And when we talk about the APR, the annual performance report, you'll hear me a lot of times use that term interchangeably with Ed 524. And that's just the wonky name of that actual document, that OMB approved document. You'll hear us refer to the Ed 524 report, and that's the APR. The APR has multiple parts. I'm not going to go into any of that detail today, outside of telling you that there is a cover sheet that is part of that APR package, and it requires a signature by the authorizing representative on file in G5 in order to be considered complete. So that's something that you should at this point be able to take, get a signature, scan, and upload it with the rest of your report. But just know now that that is time you have to build in to get that authorizing representative's signature on that final report. Supplement financial information in G5 and inform what's the reason for this? There are lots of reasons, but one of the primary is for our FY18s and our 21s, our existing grantees. This data is really critical for us to be able to make a case to department leadership for why you deserve a non-competitive continuation award. So your narrative, and especially for our 21 grantees where clearly it's too early for outputs, the expectation is you're giving a lot of detail about what you've been doing this year in preparation or as you launch your project. It supplements what we're looking at in G5 month to month, which is your drawdown activity. It supplements any other kind of past performance or other issues that have come up during the year if you've raised them. We ask, and I want to be really clear, it needs to include comprehensive narrative. The more information you provide about circumstances, especially when there are challenges that prevent implementation, providing detailed narrative is extremely useful for lots of reasons. And I'll give you a few examples as we move forward. It's those details, for example, that in the past have done things like allowed us to make requests and have them granted to revise regulations, to extend the time that people have to graduate and get placed due to COVID. When there are really, mitigating issues, we want to be able to bring them to the leadership's attention and get that accommodation. It's not a gotcha. It's not an effort to look for ways to reduce your grant. It's not an effort to look for ways to stop you from doing what you're doing. It's really an effort to try to identify what it is that we need to do in terms of providing the right kinds of technical assistance to help you and your participants be successful. So the less you provide, the more we have to guess at what the issues are. And it is a time-sensitive process. So, and it is frankly just me with 49 grants needing to review all of these APRs and give a timely recommendation to the secretary. Next slide. So I want to first talk about the milestones for the 18 grantees, since yours is due first. The APR for the 18 cohort will become available on the last day of this month. So at the end of the day on January 31st, that's when you'll be able to, like February 1, you should be able to go into G5 and see the actual package. And when I say package for new project directors, that means a letter that tells you exactly what you need to report and why and by when. So it's a formal just notification letter to you as the grantee. And then it's the 3 parts of the Ed 524, which I mentioned earlier. There was a cover sheet. There's a second part, which covers the narrative, and alongside the narrative are actual, quantitative measure spaces for you to populate where you are with each both GEPRA measure as well as program-specific objectives. And then the last part are budget and summary sections and extra section. And typically we give you guidance about what additional data. In most cases, it's about, I've got carryover and this is what I need to do with it in the following year. It's that kind of explanation, and we'll talk about that later. So it's some of that, it's those basic pieces of information that we ask for. And we do expect that there will be, it's probably going to be late February, and I'm still finalizing that date, but there will be one APR training for both the FY18 and the FY21 grantees. So it's going to be one event, mainly because many of you are both, not all of you, but many of you. So it makes sense to kind of cover it all in one fell swoop. The other dates that I just want to call out that you'll have opportunities to ask questions, to get more information, both on the APR and what Karen's going to talk about shortly, which is the data collection in the PDP DCS, are these various talking circle dates. And then of course the APR itself, it will be due on Thursday, March 31st. Okay. I ask you to look at those dates now. I know for some of you, it could mean overlap with things like spring break, other break times that you might have in your terms. So just be mindful of those dates and times at this point. Let's go to the next slide, please. So for 21 grantees, for the new cohort, the APR will become available at the end of February, so on February 28. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the due date will be Friday, April 29. So we give you almost 60 days, about 60 days there. Again, same APR training date, which will be sometime in late February. You get one additional talking circle maybe. But really, in essence, again, I strongly encourage you all to be part of these talking circles. I know they're not mandatory. I'm not going to make them mandatory because there are a couple of other items that are, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But it really does behoove you to hear what others have to say to both help, streamline what you're having to do in your work, and to maybe figure out ways to do it better and more efficiently, just by virtue of some of the questions that your colleagues ask too, or that you have that might benefit your colleagues as well. I'm going to stop for a second. Any questions on these so far? I don't see anything in the chat, but if you have something you are burning to say, go ahead and unmute. I'm cool with that. Okay. If anything comes up, feel free to stop me. Let's go to the next slide. So I mentioned that in addition to the APRs, and in that first chart I shared that we have a corresponding data collection for the Professional Development Program Data Collection System, or PDP DCS. And Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you if you don't mind walking just through the timeline here. And I know we're going to come back to this in a bit.
Sure. So I wanted to kind of identify one, area for you to focus on in each month. So starting off with this month, this is your time to sort of prepare for the PDP DCS data collection. This is a good time for you to log in, make sure you've got your secondary user identified, make sure that's correct. Start gathering together the information you're going to need to enter. And also, we're going to send out an email that we call the notification letter, which sort of outlines the timeline for the data collection. And we'll ask all of you to acknowledge receipt of that letter so that we know that you got it. And all of that will happen in January. And then at the next talking circle in February, on February 11th, Angela and I will do a training about the PDP DCS data collection, and that will be more of a higher level training, focusing on what we need you to do right now during the data collection. One of the things that we're going to talk about in a little bit is whether or not we should also offer what we're calling an in-depth training. For some of you, particularly you new grantees, you haven't actually added participants yet to the system. We did a training back in the fall, but it's been a while. So we're trying to get kind of a sense of whether or not we should offer another training to kind of go over the real basics. So the February 11th training, I see the question, is just for the grantees. It should be anyone on your team that's going to help with the data collection. And then we'll have the official start of the data collection on that same day on February 11th. I see a question in the chat about the training. I'm sorry.
Is there a time on that February 11th? Sorry, that might have been the text question.
No. It's during the talking circle, which I think is at 3
Eastern?
3, I'm sorry, yes, 3 Eastern.
Karen, let me add a clarification here because
Sure.
I got a question from DeLacy, and thank you, DeLacy,
Okay.
for that question because it helps to make sure it's clear to everybody. We're talking already about 2 different types of trainings. The first training I was referring to that is a TBD and will happen in late February is specific to completing the annual performance report at 524 package that you'll submit via G5. This training that Karen's referring to for February 11th, which is during the scheduled talking circle time, is specific to the data collection or the reporting. And when I say reporting, it's really up-to-date information that you're making sure is entered for your participants in the PDP DCS. So I want to qualify that because I know we have some FY21 grantees who do not have participants yet. You will not be entering any data because you have no participants yet. Is that clear, Karen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Are there any other questions? So that training on February 11th
Yes.
will be during the talking circle.
I had a
Yes.
question. This is Allison from Blue Lake Rancheria. We're one of those 21 year grantees. We have all 8 of our cohort, and I've got all their stuff in PDPDS except for their living allowances and their fall tuition. I'm waiting on our financial reports from the end of December to be able to enter that. And I know that tuition for the spring semester is our Humboldt State University is going to be billing us in February. So I'm only going to have half a year's data in the system. Is that okay?
As of April 8th, Allison?
Well, they're going to bill us in February for the tuition, so I'll have February's tuition. I can verify those numbers by the end of February, and then they'll have a living allowance for January and February and March, but I won't have their program isn't done until June, so I won't have the whole year. Is that okay?
Sure. Karen, you want to answer that?
Sure, yes. So what we're looking for, Allison, is for you to be as up to date as you possibly can be by April 8th. So you won't have to have all of the year's data, but by April 8th, we want everything to be brought up to date. The system's available to you all year round, but we sort of designate this like 2-month period so that we can kind of focus on everything, get a snapshot of the data, and work with all of you to kind of do some, look at your data, make sure everything's there. So it's everything that you have so that it's up to date as of April 8th. I see a question in there about the secondary users attending trainings. Absolutely. And so when we ask the question too about the in-depth training, it could be that you're totally fine. You don't need any more additional training on the PDP DCS. But again, you should think about whether or not anyone from your team needs to attend one of those trainings. So
I would also add anyone that maybe isn't listed yet as a secondary user, but you're considering putting them there and they're going to need to do some of that work or support you in that. You should feel free to have them join.
mhm.
Real quick question. How many secondary users are we allowed to have? I was under the idea that we only are allowed to have 1.
You are right now only allowed to have 1, though exciting future. We are piloting right now having more than 1. Not with the OIE projects yet, but with one of the other grant programs that we support. So hopefully in the future, you'll be able to designate more than 1.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So in March, that's when you're pulling all of your data together. And feel free to contact our help desk. I put the email there. You'll see it at the end. Payback applications at ed.gov. If you have any issues as you're entering data, we're more than happy to answer your questions anytime from 8 to 8 East Coast time. And then in April, the data collection will end on April 8th. And that's actually, I usually get asked this question, that is midnight. So you have until midnight to get everything up to date in the system. And then in May, what my team does is we kind of take a snapshot of all of the data and we kind of look through and make sure everything looks, reasonable. Sometimes we see, really high amounts of funding. And so we might send you an email that says, hey, did you really give someone $500,000? Or maybe there's an extra zero there. So you may be reached out to by someone from our team to answer a couple questions about the data. And that's just our chance to kind of review the quality of everything. And that will wrap everything up for the data collection. There's a question in the chat about allowing an external evaluator to have access to the data. I think in addition to, I'm assuming that's in addition to a secondary user. So we might want to talk a little bit more offline about what kinds of data. Again, the access that you all have to the individual participants includes their social security number. It might be the kind of thing where you might want us to, pull some of your data into an Excel file and let the evaluator look at that, and rather than having full access to go in and see, all of the PII contact information for all of your participants. But we can
Karen, I would add that both for our benefit and for you guys, the grantees, we strongly discourage against violating the user rules of behavior. And that's simply the fact that please don't lend out your information, your user information, to anyone else other than yourselves. You're on the hook for that, and you sign an assurance when you do that. I'm more than happy to have that conversation, Joe, and it's a good question. To the extent you want to be able to extract any data. But in general, I just want to make sure that we're clear about that. And it's partly why it's security rules of the department that frankly have set the precedent for the restriction on even just having 2 users in the system. So I just want to be clear about that. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Charlotte, can we go on to the next slide with the polling question? I want to come back to what Karen posed just a moment ago. So Charlotte's going to put up a quick poll, and this just kind of will give us some guidance about the extent to which we need to move beyond just a quick sort of primer during what we mentioned during a talking circle session. If people really want something much more in-depth, please say that right here in the poll. And we can certainly work to add a more comprehensive training. And Karen, I'll reiterate, something more comprehensive again is something that secondary users are more than welcome to attend as well. Okay. Looks like we got about 40%.
I had a real quick question. This is Allison from Blue Lake again.
Yep.
I know that in a previous meeting, we discussed the fact that you want our participants to log into PDPDS and like either screenshot it or verify the number that is what they've received, and to do that on a regular basis. Is that correct?
So I'm going to say it depends. Yes, it is correct. I've given you that guidance, and there's sort of the while they're a participant and after they're a participant, so, or after they've completed and been exited. I'm going to let Karen speak to the after completed and exited, and that's pretty clear and regulated. while they are a participant, we've talked about this a little bit, Allison, where we strongly encourage you all to make the practice of them going in, one, to verify that their data is accurate. It's a good practice for a couple of reasons. One is they ought to want to know how much dollars you're assigning to them that they could be potentially obligated to pay if they don't complete service payback. But I know I would want to know, and I'd want to make sure it was accurate and consistent with what I think I should be charged as a participant. But just as important, it's also giving them and putting them in that practice of doing it, because after they leave your hands, your support, and your program, they on their own are going to have to continue to check in to that system every 6 months in order to be able to request and ultimately receive credit for the service payback that they're going to be requesting time served for, credit for. So I just want to make sure that that's something that you're trying to do. And that's just a best practice, because if people never have to look at it and all of a sudden it becomes something that is, you know, it's a make or break for them in terms of their debt obligation once they leave and they don't have you there sort of reminding them, it's a little bit harder to institute that kind of practice later because it's really just us having to reach out to them and we don't have that relationship that you guys do. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It does make sense. And the reason why I asked is we're trying to, as we're going through our program evaluation, gearing up for our first year report, we're trying to put together like a calendar of here's what our cohort participants have to do and when they have to do it, like a check off box, like log in and check your balance, send us a screenshot verifying you checked your balance. Did you do, you know, these various things to help them through the process, like you said, to get them in the habit of going there at least once every 6 months and updating. So
That's
I
an
just,
awesome idea, Allison. And I would say, in addition to that, you mentioned earlier, you know, that it's at a certain point in time that you really have the financial data. So, you know, having it correspond to when it makes sense, right, for them to look at it, that it's in there, that would make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, I think that's great.
great. Okay, I just want to make sure because this is our first time. I'm super, super nervous because it's our first grant in the professional development and using PDPDCS. So I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing. Thank you so much.
Sure, sure. All right. And I think you got a kudos there from one of your colleagues. So yeah, great idea. Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte, for this poll. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And thank you, Nancy. I know there are a number of you, like Nancy in the chat box mentioned, you know, they inform participants two times a year about their payback application and ask them to check. So, you know, different people, they encourage, some people require, you know, it's all up to you. And I know some of you, frankly, have more capacity than others to be able to, you know, be a little bit more hands-on with that guidance and support. So you have to do what works best for you and for them. Any other questions? Okay. Again, feel free to stop us as we go along. Let's go to the next slide. So I chose this image, this graphic, Karen, because anytime we're talking about data, I need caffeine. I don't know about the rest of you. I hope you can go with less. But yeah, we've been spending a lot of time discussing the DCS. And I know for those of you who've been using it for some time, I know that sometimes it can be a bear, especially for your participants. But this is really, I think, changed the game for the program over the last many years since we instituted this system. It's certainly better than paper and it's helped us to keep track. And I think the one important thing is we can always do better at the department in terms of the quality and the validity. And so as we identify issues, we want to make sure that we're bringing them to your attention, letting you know how we're rectifying the situations and making sure that we continue to have a dialogue about how to move it forward and help participants be successful. Let's go to the next slide. So when I think about the system, the data collection system and the data quality, one is making sure, as we just talked about, that people are keeping the training information updated. It's not only important to us, I frankly think it's most important to the participant, about who all this data is for, and about. Making sure that we're really clear about when we exit participants and doing that at the right time, and making sure that the status is correct at all times. And then we want to talk a little bit today about some critical updates around tracking service payback obligations after people have exited your program. So many of you have seen this, fulfillment in progress, fulfillment not in progress, or, payback complete. So we're going to talk a little bit about those, some issues that have come up as we've talked with you guys, as we've done updates, and this is going to be an ongoing conversation for sure, but wanted to raise this now. Let's go to the next slide. So first, again, just when we talk about keeping training information up to date, it's timely changes about their contact information, about the funds that you're using to support the participant, any change in enrollment or completion status. What I want to remind people about is that I tend to hear from many of you around the prospects of leaves of absence for grantees, or for participants rather. And to the extent that that's happening, it's critical that you're updating their record to indicate those leave of absence periods, both for the purposes of not becoming inaccurate in terms of their service obligation time, but also it really is a flag to the extent that it really is happening as much as I'm hearing it could be happening among your participants. And I'm really speaking to the 18 cohort, but this is because we expect, and I know for many of you hearing the stories, it's anecdotally speaking, I'm hearing a lot of COVID related impacts, right, that continue to plague our participants. And so that's really important information to have, to know, and to be able to convey to leadership. So again, if you are not sure if you put somebody in a leave of absence, but that's where they are, you need to make sure you're updating those records. And that's some of the things, if you need sort of the mechanics of how to do that, that's some of what Karen would cover in those training sessions as well. Next slide, please. So exiting participants. So again, when do we exit? Well, there are two basic reasons. You exit without completion. They've left the program, either dropped out, withdrawn, whatever. They left and they did not graduate. The second reason, and for FY18s, this will be coming up for you guys in the next year or two, is when your grant ends, even if the participant is still in training, you must exit them. And that's really less about the accuracy of the designation of exit without completion. It's more that the project period has ended, right? There's not going to be any more funding. So for the purposes of this program, you do have to exit them. Exiting with completion, they've met all your program requirements and they've earned the requisite degree or native language certificate. Induction occurs after they've exited with completion. This doesn't necessarily mean, as we know, that they've earned licensure or certification, unless that was for some reason a graduation requirement. To best of my knowledge, that's not the case for any of you, but if it is, that would be the only reason to not exit them. The other issue I want to raise about exiting everybody is that at the end of any grant period, you'll see that I'm coming back to you in order to make sure that you've exited everybody. And that's just a requisite so that I can close your grant in compliance. So that's something that's really critical. We want to make sure to close it in compliance. It's not just that you've exited them, but that you've been able to verify that you've let all of those participants know what their obligation is from that point forward. Okay.
Angela, we have a question in the chat.
Yep.
I can go ahead and take it if it's okay, because it's
Yeah.
more sense to me. So Carmelita asked about a participant who she had exited, but has actually come back, which is awesome. And so the answer is yes, it can be changed. However, you'll need to contact The help desk, preferably in an email that says that this participant needs to have their status changed back to enrolled. And then someone on the help desk with administrator rights can make that change for you, and then everything will be ready for you to enter data.
Okay, so then I'll do that and update on the student. You know, every once in a while that'll happen where you'll have one exit, and then lo and behold, I was at the tribal college today, and my program liaison there said, "Well, guess who's back?" Which I was happy to hear. I was happy to hear that he was back. We need men in elementary ed. There's no question about that, and especially Native men. And he's stronger and on good track. But I told her I would have to bring this forward because I didn't want to make that kind of decision and then tell the participant that he was back within the program. He's a 2018 awardee. So okay, thank you.
And he's going back to the same 2018 grant, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, I knew that he couldn't come into 2021, but there is opportunity for support for him in the 18 award. And I just want to make sure that that's going to be okay.
Yes, thank you, Carmelita. And that's a really great question. The reason I raised the issue around them going back to the same grant is because I know sometimes we get questions about, well, they were in a grant from back when, can they join the new grant now? And there's a lot of it depends in that conversation. So if you feel like you have that kind of situation, I would ask you to get in contact with me about it, to talk about it, because it's very much a case by case. There's a lot of different circumstances to weigh and consider in making those kinds of requests. And most of the time it's fine, but we just want to work through that first. Karen, anything you want to add there?
No.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to turn this over to you now, Karen.
Okay. So Angela was talking about what we call the completion status, right? Where people are they still enrolled, have they graduated, have they exited? So what I'm going to focus on for the next few slides is kind of diving in a little bit more to the participant payback obligation status, which when you look at your view all participants page, this is another status column in that report. And so on that page, on that view all participants page is where you can see these definitions that I'm going to walk through for each of these statuses. I'm not going to cover all the statuses right now. I'm just going to talk about 4 of the big ones and how they're going to relate to some of the follow-up that we're going to do with your participants. So the first status is awaiting login. And these are participants that have never logged into the PDP-DCS. And so they've been sent an email inviting them to participate because you have submitted their record into the system, but they haven't actually logged in yet, okay? And then there's awaiting completion. And so these are participants that have logged into the system, but we're just waiting for them to finish their program. So they're either on a leave of absence or they are enrolled in the program right now. And so they haven't finished the training, so they can't start fulfilling their service. Okay, so they haven't finished the training, but they have logged in, which means they're doing what we talked about earlier. They're going in, every 6 months or so and looking to see what you've entered for their data. Next slide, please. So then we have fulfillment in progress. And again, you can kind of see how the statuses are building, right? So this is a participant who has logged into the system. So at some point they were probably awaiting completion. At this point now, though, they've reported that they've completed the program or exited prior to completion. And that this participant has now gone in and entered eligible employment and the employer has verified it. Okay, so all 4 of those things have to happen for there to be fulfillment in progress. The issue with this status, and that we're going to kind of talk about, is that if the participant stops making the updates every 6 months or so, because the system knows that they put in some employment and had that employment verified, it's not going to take away their status of fulfillment in progress, okay? It doesn't automatically turn them into fulfillment not in progress. What we're going to look into further along is coming up with a different status for those folks, that they've done some fulfillment, but are, potentially getting you off track. But we have sort of a workaround that we're working on for the more immediate future. Changing status, the code for statuses is enormously complex and requires a lot of testing. So we are, we want to take our time with that. Next slide. So when I talk about those participants that have done this, so that they have gone in and they've entered some information, had it verified, what we're going to do now as a center, as a PDP-DCS team, is that we're going to reach out to those folks, okay? So we are going to, anyone that's entered employment but didn't get it updated anytime past June 2021, we're going to send them out an email this month. And we will CC you as project directors. So we'll send an advance email to you all so that you will be ready, because they will come to you individually, and it will, if you have a number of participants, then that might be a lot of emails to receive all at once. But the idea in this email is to remind the participant that they need to be going in every 6 months and to update their information. What we have found on Help Desk is that if the participant entered employment and had it verified, then the assumption is sort of that the system just knows that they're still working there. But unfortunately, the system doesn't. And so it's only giving them credit up to the point where they had it verified. So if they want more credit, they have to go into the system and submit it again. Okay. If we don't hear back from the participants, we call it non-response follow-up. If we get no response from them, then someone from the help desk team, typically our evening help desk shifts, because they're a little bit slower and they are also able to work more with the West Coast, they will start calling and sending text messages to the participants, okay? And that'll happen in February. And then if we still get no response from folks, then we're going to go ahead and we'll send them a hard copy letter. This will help us if people have moved. We can often get notified if we've got, a bad address or something like that. It will come on Department of Ed letterhead and remind them that they need to update their employment. And for those folks that are now then beyond the time that they had to fulfill their service, if they haven't gone in and made those updates, then we're setting them up to be referred for cash repayment in May. Right now, the president has put a hold on student debts, and that's due to expire in May. So we have this we're doing a number of activities to reach out to them before May comes, and we would potentially have to make a referral.
So Karen, I just want to take a minute to make sure everyone is clear about what we're saying we're going to do. So number one is, you will likely hear, if you are an 18 or even have an older 17 or 16 grant, it's very possible that you're going to hear from some of your older participants. If they freak out calling you in February, March, or April, the department's trying to call me, or why do they want to get a hold of me? Are they going to, make me pay or whatever? Or, are they asking me for money? The short answer is no. We're asking them to make sure that their information is up to date and that we've given them every opportunity to enter requests for service payback. We want to get those right so that we know the majority of participants who are in this fulfillment not in progress, or maybe this limbo of not really identified as not really having progress made. It could just be this, this administrative error that Karen was referring to, where they haven't continually updated their request for service payback credit. So we want to make sure that's right. It is not before May that we would start sending forwarding any cases, any accounts to the Department of Treasury for debt referral. And please know that if we were going to do that, they will get separate letters that also tells them that, and they will know that. We will do our best to communicate that to you, but the fact of the matter is, for many of you, especially when we're talking about older closed grants, it's not really technically within your purview anymore. it's within ours at that point. So if there are any that we might be referring for any grants that happen to still be open, I'm thinking of those really older 16s or maybe the 17s and a no cost extension. That's where you might get wind of it while your grant is still open. But really, I just want to make sure that people are clear that if you hear from folks, strongly encourage them, log in that system, make sure that their info is up to date and that they're getting the credit they think they deserve. If they've been working, we want them to get the credit. So we don't want somebody to be sent mistakenly. And if they're not responsive, we have to work with only the information we have. So we just ask for your cooperation to the extent you can encourage them to do that. And if you know there's situations that are anomalous or that we need to consider, you know, I'm happy to talk to you about those offline. Okay. Thanks, Karen. Let's go to the next slide.
So this slide is just, again, pointing out the regulation that requires the participants to be going in 6 months from the time that they start entering their employment to make these updates. And that's just so that they can, you know, see their continuous progress. So we want to have them go in. We're building in automatic reminders for the participants. So it will remind them to go in every 6 months. And like I said, we're doing these non-response efforts and then over the next 5 months to kind of to bring everybody current is our plan. Next slide, please. What we want to do is add another column for you all so that when you look at this report and you see fulfillment in progress, that you can look and see when the employment was last verified. So in this example, my mother, Michelle Harold, has fulfillment in progress, but she hasn't verified her employment since May 31st of 2021. So she will be one of the people that I'm emailing, and she will potentially, you know, if she ignores me, will potentially be getting, you know, a phone call or a letter, depending on how quickly she responds. Whereas my father, Ted Schroll, he also is fulfillment in progress, right? But he last had it verified back in October. So he's in great shape right now. He doesn't need to do it until March. And then we'll again keep with this kind of process of going. So that's the column that will appear so that you can see it. There's a quick question. How does the participant start to begin logging in if they aren't sure where to start? I would absolutely, if a participant hasn't logged in and they, I'm sure, have lost that email by now, they can call the help desk and the help desk can walk them through the process if it's on the phone, or resend the email so that they have what they need. Okay.
I want to underscore that because a lot of folks get really nervous about contacting that help desk. Karen has many times, and I just want to remind folks, Karen's many times reminded people that if, even instead of calling, if you want to email, and I'm talking really to participants who really just need every kind of handholding to get started, send an email and tell your participants, send an email, let them know what day and time works best, maybe to have that conversation and to be able to sit down and walk through with you. They're more than willing to help them in that way. So in a manner that's convenient to the participants and that will help them be successful. So please take advantage of that.
And I'll actually repeat that as well for all of you, even when it comes to your data collection. If you think that you have a lot of questions or you need more time with a person on help desk, it really helps us if you do send some times, because then we can designate a person to reach back out to you. So
I'm going to ask you, Karen, or actually Charlotte, can you go back one slide? And this is really critical. So Cheryl, thank you for that question. Should the participant need to verify employment every year, and for how long should they do this? So this is the program regulation. Yes, they should be reporting and updating every 6 months their service payback status. they submit, it says to the secretary, but by that they mean the PDP DCS. So you're submitting that every 6 months, beginning from the date they started their work, right? That they got that contract and start working. And they do it for however many months it says in the system, they have to do it. So if they had training, received a training benefit for, let's say, 16 months, that's 16 months of service payback that needs to be completed. And so every, that's at least 3 times if we're talking about 16 months, right? 6, 12, and 18, to be able to go back and get and request that service payback credit. And again, if they need help interpreting that or understanding exactly what they should owe, that's something they can go to the help desk about. If it's after the program is ended and you're not there to help them anymore, they should contact. But yes, every 6 months, and it's the length, the equivalent of the service payback obligation is to that of however many months they received a training benefit. And just a little sidebar reminder that if they aren't doing the summer months, we're really talking 9 months per year, right? So for many, it could be like 18 months or 24 months if it was 3 years. And that will depend on what you entered in the system for those individuals during their training program.
There's another question in the chat about if they haven't reported their time, can they still get credit for the work? And yes, so that's partly why we're doing this additional effort to reach back out to folks, to give them this time while all of the debt referral is on kind of hold right now, so we can get everybody up to date so that they can receive the credit for what they've done.
Charlotte, can we go back? Yeah, let's go forward rather to the next slide. Thanks.
Okay, so the fulfillment not in progress folks. So these are folks that did log into the system, but now that they've completed the training program or exited prior to completion, but they haven't entered eligible employment, or their employment hasn't been verified. So if they entered employment, but they didn't get it, the employer, either ignored our emails or it got sent to the wrong person and it needs to be redone, they're not going to turn into fulfillment in progress until that employment is verified. And so the participant knows from their own page, whether or not they've submitted employment and whether or not it's been verified, or in some cases, the employer disputes the information that was in and the participant needs to make an update. So, or it's people that are still looking for jobs, that they haven't found employment yet, and that's why they're on still fulfillment not in progress. So they're completers, they've logged in, but they haven't actually started fulfilling their service. Can we go to the next slide? And these are folks that we touched, like Angela held meetings with all of you back in the fall, I believe. We were particularly concerned about those completers. I want to be clear that it's the people that have finished the program or exited prior to completion. So that haven't actually entered employment, right? So these are people that are really, really on the verge at this point of being referred for repayment. And again, this is all on hold until May, but our plan right now is to go straight to mailing them a hard copy letter and alerting them that this is their final opportunity, to reach out to our help desk and enter that employment so that they don't get referred for cash repayment. So I just want to be clear. So it's the awaiting logins that have completed. So you may have a handful of people that you just added a participant or whatever. We really don't want anyone to be awaiting login, but obviously if they're still enrolled in the programs, there's not as much of a consequence versus those that have exited and are still awaiting login. And we know that you all have done a ton of non-response. Sorry, that's what the follow-up with them, trying to get them to log in. So this is our attempt to use the mail, the department logo. We're going to really be clear that they need to get in and update the system.
Thanks, Karen. Next slide. I'm going to move us past the question slide. We're going to come, feel free to ask if you have them, any questions in the chat. This is just your laundry list of reminders of the monthly office hours, and somebody asked a good question the other day with me on the phone about the monthly office hours. Those office hours are open to all OIE programs. So I do understand sometimes you're hearing questions that may not be relevant to this particular program, but it doesn't preclude you from asking them if you do have them there. So that's just an FYI, which are different, of course, from our talking circle events. And then you note here in the middle, we make reference real quick to the project directors meeting. So it's a save the date, May 10 to 12. It is virtual. So yay, you can shift those funds for DC travel to other things that you might need more for your program. So just an FYI as you think about that. And Valerie, thank you for that question. It's 4 o'clock and I want to just recognize that. I'm going to answer some questions, but if people have to jump, I completely understand. I'm going to just encourage you to please answer the end of event poll that Charlotte's put up. And if you'd like to stay on, I'm happy to answer any other questions that come through the chat, or if you want to unmute, feel free to do that. I'm going to go back up. Valerie asked, what happens if the employer is not responding or verifying employment for the participant? That's a great question. If you find that that's the case, they can feel free to contact me. Okay. Or you can contact me if it's something, if it's a grant still open and you want to just advocate for the participant. I'm happy to have a conversation with both of you and we can troubleshoot how to address that. Because there could be a number of different reasons. It could be technical, meaning they're not getting the email, or maybe if it's something more than that, then we should probably have a conversation. Got it. Doug, I'm looking at your question. You'll see us refer, if you see references to the gobbledygook ARBMD, that is actually the Department of Education's finance office, Office of Financial Operations. And we work with them. They really just sort of are the paper pusher, if you will, from our office through them to Treasury. And so they're not really making any decisions outside of really being the transmitter of any information related to debt referral. But once we do hand it to them, yes, it goes directly from them to Treasury, and there is no connection, if you will, to us, the department at that point. To the extent you have any individuals, I know they're killing me too, Doug, they're killing me too. To the extent you have somebody asking, you know, I got something from Treasury and I don't know what to do, they should always respond to the contact information of Treasury. They can't appeal things if they think it's wrong, if they think what we submitted is an error and they should get credit, they must work directly through Treasury. The short story is they come back to us and then I end up working through them, but we have to work with them. We cannot work directly with the participant at that point. So please tell them any questions, they have to work through Treasury for those kinds of appeals. Okay. And that tends to be much older cases. We're not really talking about somebody even from a 16 cohort at this point. We're talking about things that have been out. Anything else, folks? Karen, do you have time to work with Shannon on a login issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I can stay on.
Awesome. Okay. Any others?
Angela.
Yeah.
So Carmelita, this is having to do just with the final report on the 2016 award. Okay. So, and if anybody, if you're not interested, I beg your pardon, or maybe I should talk to you later about it. Excuse me. Anyway, so it's getting really convoluted, and I'm thinking, well, is this how they want it? So when we're looking at I've got all the data from all the years on 2016 on just like a Word document. So then I'm going to drop it in year one, blah, blah, blah. And so you're expecting then for that section A to be like a mile long, right? Because you want section A year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, then GEPRA year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5.
I was going to be
each one of those things.
snarky, Carmelita, and say, no, I don't really want it, but I'm required to ask you for it.
Yeah, okay, so that's one and the same. Because I don't want to give it to you, but I am required to do it anyway. So
Yeah,
that's just I thought, man,
it
alive.
is. It's long and arduous. I completely get it. It really
Yeah.
is. It's very cumbersome.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is a final performance report is that it's comprehensive. I'm going to say something else about that though. For the 16s that already ended, some of ours that had, those first NCEs or didn't have any, I have read through all of those, and I have been taking the time to pull some of the major accomplishments from each one. And in my spare time, my hope was to work with our technical assistance team to really try to just coalesce some of the promising practices. And my hope is to do that by the time we get to the project directors meeting, so that we can share out some of those really good news things that many of you guys are sharing in those. So please know that those aren't going by the wayside there.
Okay, yeah, because what they show in 2016 is so much different than now we see as far as in the G5, just the way it's set up. And so, I know that it locks out. And so when the time comes, I'm just going to cut and paste as fast as I can, to hopefully not to lose any of that,
I would also want to mention, just for the benefit of any others on the line who have some of those 16s, and this is something, a couple of things I wanted to mention to folks, and 2 issues. One is related to this, which is we definitely, as always happens, because after so much time, you guys get tired of playing in this role and you pass off the baton. One of the challenges when that happens, when project directors change within a single grant, is that single project, the new project director cannot go back and extract the APR in G5 from the prior years. And unless that person is gracious enough, which I know in some cases, thank you all for any of you who are on the line who did this, went to some of the folks who are still at the entity, at the university, but not necessarily in this role. They were able to pull it for them. But if you find that you need those and you can't access them, you'll need to come to me and I'll be able to extract those for you. Okay, so I just want to note that. The bigger story here, though, frankly, is really keep those things on file. And, when you win the lottery and you decide to leave and pass it off, then make sure that you're handing people those performance reports when you leave.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, well,
so
that was just a question. I wanted to make sure that I was clear. I've looked at that training video that you did in July. I think probably, I don't know how many times I kept on stopping, because then I saw, oh my gosh, I didn't do that. There was something on the cover sheet that was like related to our, almost like FERPA with digital information, some statement. So
it's a new item. Yep.
Is that a new item? Okay.
It's a newer item.
Doing that before. And so I went down at IT going, where's the statement?
Yeah.
So I'm digging on that one.
I want to switch gears for a quick second for those of you still on the line, and also talk about something. And Karen, you and I talked about this, which was, I got a great question from a participant the other day, and their corresponding project director asked me the same, which was, if you guys recall, when you for FY21 grantees and FY18, when you have that list, right, of high proportion LEAs by state. I had a participant get in contact and ask, hey, I completed my degree in my program in this state, but I'm now in Florida, and Florida's not on that list. Does that mean I can't do my service payback? And the answer is absolutely not. You can do your service payback in Florida. All it means is that we don't have Florida listed there. So I kind of want to refresh people's memories, and I'll bring this up again next time. But just know those lists I had mentioned early on are not comprehensive. We took the states we took all the states where all of our grantees are. So for example, we don't have Colorado on it. We don't have, Texas on it. So there are states not on there. It does not at all mean that they can't complete service payback in a different state. It just means we need to generate the state report for you in order to be able to do that. So that's a big, please don't tell them they can't complete service payback in another state that's not listed there. Just, this is something where you have to ping me and let me know that, hey, they're going to move to Michigan. We need a generated state report so we know where to go. So that's something just as an FYI. And Cheryl, thank you. South Dakota is actually on there because we have grantees in South Dakota. But again, there are many states that are not on there because we have no PD grantees in those states. So if that comes up, please let us know so that we can provide that information to your participants. And over time, we'll continue to add to that. Okay. And yes, Doug, that same high proportion definition does apply in each of those states. So you'll see percentages generated just like all the other state data that we share in those reports. And finally, those lists are also in that technical assistance page under service payback obligation. And not incidentally, they sit right above the one participant targeted training that we recorded and posted on the site. So that was the other thing I wanted to mention. Karen certainly and the help desk can help participants get through the system, but there's also that webinar that we recorded and that's there that walked participants specifically through the training about how to use the DCS. So please recommend that as a resource as well. Any other questions?
I had a question. This is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
I have a 16 grant, the second year, no cost extension. I was going to ask for those dates again. When is that APR for all 6 years due? Again, it's January.
I have to go back to my original letter to you all. Give me
Yes, well, the final report would be due
next year.
Yes, so 23, like January or something.
Yeah, did I write 22 on that chart? Did I
Yeah,
scare
it
you?
said 22 and you scared me again. You scared me.
You haven't finished, but you bet it's due at the end of the month, Nancy. I will fix that before I share out this slide deck, but I am
Okay.
going to send this slide deck to everybody so you guys have the dates.
Okay, so
for everything.
that final report is due January 23. I was slightly worried for my students that are still student
And-
teaching this
And
spring.
Nancy, we're talking about a second NCE that ends at the end of the summer, right?
Yeah, I think it in September 30th.
30.
Yep.
Those are September 30 end dates. So
Yeah,
just a reminder that the department changed its policy about final performance reports that used to be due 90 days after the end of the budget period. They're now due 120 days. So you really have 4 months.
Oh, happy
So that's why it's the end of
days.
January
And
and not the end of
120
December.
days to figure out the things that Carmelita was talking about. I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, well, yeah, I was slightly worried that I had about 10 days to get something together, but I don't.
I'm sorry to do that to you. I didn't
No,
mean to
that's
start
okay.
your New Year's off.
That's okay. I got
Period.
2 student teachers set up this spring. I'm so happy. Even
That's
though
great.
we're really surging. Oh, we're
I
living through
know.
it.
That's the other thing. We talk about this all the time because all of you have been impacted directly, indirectly, your participants.
Yeah.
There's real life, guys, and we know that. So if there are real issues that you need to contend with, I hope you'll feel comfortable enough to reach out and let me know if you think you need more time, if there's something that's come up.
Yeah.
You first. So,
we do try.
yeah.
We do. Yeah. So anyway, thank
Karen,
you.
anything else on your end you want to mention?
No, I
We're
think
good?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, just to Nancy's point, I'm going to update that one date for the 16 cohort. This slide deck will get shared out with everyone afterward, and we'll follow up on with just again some clarity, additional guidance on the exact training dates as we get those solidified. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be on. And if you stayed on longer, that much more thanks to you all. Have a great week. Thank you, Charlotte. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Have a good evening, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.